Welcome to Weekends. Yes, Nando. I love that Miami boy coming out, bumping and grinding to that sweet, sweet Jacobin song. So good. What's up, everyone?
In the club, with the Jacobin song. Pretty soon, we'll just get David Guetta to do a remix of the Jacobin intro song.
Can you imagine?
And yeah, it'll be so good.
Jacobin going mainstream. That's what will happen. Everyone will be like, what is this song? Where does it come from? And then we'll just slowly radicalize people. That's what we do here over at Jacobin. Anyway, welcome everyone to a special edition of Weekends. I say it's a special edition because the format of the show is going to be a little different today because this is pre-recorded. So we're releasing this during our regularly scheduled program, but it's a pre-tape because of the fact that Nando and I aren't available this weekend, unfortunately, but we still wanted to make sure that we had a show ready to go for you guys. So we're going to have Big Waz on, Wozni Lambre, to help us, dig into some of these stories of the week. We're going to talk about the PRO Act. We are going to discuss Israel. And so just consider the fact that this is a pre-taped show. So if we say anything that's a little bit outdated, that's the reason why. But we're going to have more of a general discussion about it. And then I'm super excited for our interview with Alex Press. She's going to come on to discuss some of the latest trends with Amazon and what they're doing with their, I think it's more of a PR strategy than anything, in trying to make it appear as though they're actually not so terrible to their workers, but we know otherwise. So it's going to be a great show. I'm looking forward to it.
This is a new format for us. We're experimenting. It's like that classic Mr. So sketch, the pre-taped call-in show. It's very difficult to coordinate. So there won't be any live comments, no live questions, because we are not live. This thing that you're watching right now actually is not happening right now. It already happened in the past. So if we were to answer live comments, it would be very difficult to coordinate. So
it'd be hard to do it. Yeah,
it would be very hard.
So I thought we would start off though with some excellent news, and it was the announcement that Lula da Silva is planning to run for president in Brazil. And look, that's just a small part of the good news. The real good news is that Lula is now following Nando on Twitter.
This is true, folks. Many people are saying, maybe Cale can pull up the graphic. I don't know if he has it at the ready. Many people are saying that Nando is one of the hottest Twitter follows in the world right now because former president of Brazil, current candidate for the presidency of Brazil, Lula da Silva, followed me on Twitter this week. I was very excited. I don't know really. I don't understand why he did, but I'm glad that whichever young staffer manages his Twitter account, found my account and followed me. But this is a big deal. This is like air horn time. Do. Yeah, exactly. There it is.
Sweet.
That's very, very cool. This is a big deal. I mean, Brazil is one of the biggest democracies in the world in terms of population. It's the largest country in South America. More people live in Brazil than all the rest of South America combined. So, in the specter of not just Latin American politics, but global politics, to have a leader like Lula da Silva challenging for the presidency of what is, it has to be said, probably one of the worst governments in the world right now, the Jair Bolsonaro government. Just the stakes of this election couldn't be higher. Obviously the fate of the Amazon is important to all of us in the rest of the world. We love and we need the Amazon, not just for BBC nature documentaries, but for the ecosystem of the planet, and also for COVID, because Bolsonaro's response to COVID has been so disastrous that different variants are flaring up in Brazil. Again, it's a very large country. A ton of people live there, like over 200 million people live there. So we're going to be watching that one very closely. It is, you can't you can't think of a better example of socialism or barbarism, right? That's what it is. It's a very clear choice in that election. It's not like, the right-wing fascist versus some squishy neoliberal centrist, which is what we're used to in democracies lately. We're used to Trump versus Biden. We're used to Marine Le Pen versus Macron. We're used to the Spanish right-wing maniacs, Casado and all them versus Pedro Sanchez. It's just it sucks. And this time we actually have a real alternative, a real choice, and it's going to be very exciting.
It is exciting. And, I think it's just through years and years of covering politics and how much outcomes have kind of beaten me down or beaten my optimism down. So understand that that's where I'm coming from when I ask this question. But, I was thinking about what could possibly go wrong, because Lula was, tremendously popular in the election between Lula and Bolsonaro. And then, of course, as we all know, Bolsonaro and the judicial minister, Sergio Moro, essentially did a political stunt to imprison him. He was a political prisoner, and he was eventually freed, but there was a technicality, right? So the judge ruled that the jurisdiction in which he was prosecuted was not the right jurisdiction. So I don't know if they're going to try to prosecute him again in the right jurisdiction. But what I do know is that the people of Brazil find him to be tremendously popular because of what he did in lifting so many people out of poverty in that country. So it makes sense that he would be as popular as he is, and that it would take a political imprisonment of Lula to defeat him. Otherwise, he would have won that election.
Well, you're right that his initial ruling was about this technicality of his jurisdiction, but in follow-up kind of decisions, they also kind of made Sergio Moro himself kind of, they invalidated all his kind of investigation, so in the context of Lula himself, it was quite narrow, but in the context of Sergio Moro, the courts really kind of slapped him down pretty comprehensively. I think that, obviously the worst case scenario in Brazil, which is not something that we should discount because it's a very real possibility, is the military steps in. It was just like, no. There's going to be definitely, like, the media campaign against Lula will be vicious, as Brazil's media is horribly captured by its ruling elite. The thing is that Bolsonaro is such a buffoon, and he's been such a disaster on this one issue, which is COVID, that even a lot of people who might have previously been like totally okay with him, like the Fernando Henrique Cardosos of the world, who were kind of squishy centrists who supported him over instead of the PT because they just hated the PT so much. Like those kind of people, like they just probably can't bring themselves to, gin up support for Bolsonaro again a second time around, given all that's been going on. Just given the obvious ludicrousness of his candidacy. It's a little bit like what happened with Trump, in which, like, it's the problem with the Trump thing is that because Biden was so like uninspiring and whatever, that it was just, that was the grim choice. But like sort of respectable society was not behind Trump in any meaningful way. They were behind Bolsonaro in Brazil the last time around. Yeah, it'll be a very, very fascinating election. One of the most, I have to say, like, just from a pure just kind of politics as spectacle standpoint, like, politics is WWE. You can't think of a more exciting election in forever. Like seriously, like this is just gonna be like all of everything coming to a head in this one place. So it's definitely gonna be very exciting.
Yeah, it's definitely something to look forward to. You mentioned Republicans and Trump, and it reminded me, like, there are some parallels between Bolsonaro and Donald Trump, but there are some pretty stark differences in the political climate in the United States versus Brazil. So it is kind of amazing to see Republicans, one after the next, kind of come out and not just minimize what happened in the Capitol on January 6th, which, the rioters breached the Capitol and it was chaos. Just today it was reported that Senator Ron Johnson, a Republican, likened that day and what happened that day to a peaceful protest, which they just all fall in line, all of them.
They love him. They love it.
They love him. Yep. They raise money off of it.
The biggest difference between Trump and Bolsonaro is that Trump, while he probably enjoyed a good amount of support amongst the military's rank and file, he did not enjoy any support from the military top brass, like the generals and the admirals and the sort of the professionalized officer class of the military was, saw Trump as like unstable, embarrassing, not someone that they were comfortable leading the military machine. Bolsonaro himself comes from the Brazilian officer class. He was a Brazilian military officer. And again, the Brazilian military, that's always the X factor in this kind of thing. Trump was a fancy, just a little squishy boy from Queens. He was not an army man. He did not have their support in any meaningful way. That was always like when we were talking about the coup potential in the United States, it's like, well, what would the generals do? Would the generals support this kind of thing? And the answer was always no. They were never going to do that for Trump. Brazilian generals, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a good point. Well, Nando, we've got some stories to get to, but before we do that, why don't you give a shout out to our partner, Verso?
Yeah, because they got some stories too. Because if you join the Verso book club, you get every new ebook that Verso publishes each month, as well as one or more books in the mail. All Verso book club members will also get 50% off everything on the website, including the Verso Comrade tote bag, for as long as you are a subscriber. Each member tier is 50% off for your first 3 months. The Comrade tier is only $20 a month, and if you join in May, you'll get these 4 books. The Last Man Takes LSD, Foucault and the End of Revolution. I love the idea of just Foucault being the last guy to ever take LSD. Anyway, by Mitchell Dean and Daniel Zamora. White Skin, Black Fuel, On the Danger of Fossil Fascism by Andreas Malm and the Zetkin Collective. Neither Vertical nor Horizontal, Diagonal. No, I'm kidding. A Theory of Political Organization by Rodrigo Nunes. And Edward Said, His Thought as a Novel by Dominique Ede.
Very nice. You're in a mood today. I like it, Nando. It's a lot of fun.
It's the week. It's the week, baby. Like on the weekends, I'm in a good mood on the weekends and things like that. But I don't know. Like for some reason, this pre-tape format has me all extra pepped up. I mean, usually live gets me going. But I don't know, maybe it's like a Saturday morning thing where, it's just
totally.
I'm supposed to be watching cartoons.
Dude, it's funny because we're both super busy. You're super busy. And so, Saturday mornings are kind of chaotic and hectic. And we're trying to get elements into Cale as soon as possible, but we're working till the very last minute, right up to the moment we go live. So
I wake up at 6 a.m. every Saturday to produce my part of the show, which I should probably do on Friday, but I'm busy. I have stuff to do.
It's so hard on Fridays.
Hard. So I just do it on Saturday morning, 6 a.m. Yeah, it's not fun. So by the time the show comes around, I'm like, oh, okay, God, finally.
Yeah.
And I'm yelling at Cale all morning. I'm like, Cale, you do the thing, you stupid. And then he's like, did you read the latest thing, Catalyst? And I'm like, oh, cool.
My favorite thing about Cale is when on Saturday mornings, when it's just already chaos, he'll send us insanely long essays to read that are great. They're fantastic essays and certainly would enrich
some of them are not
segments.
So great. Some of them are like just the densest fucking theory you could ever imagine. And you're like, what does this have anything of relevance to a broadcast audience? They will have no idea what the fuck we're talking about.
I kind of like it, which is ironic because when I was getting my master's in poli-sci, theory was what I hated the most. I couldn't stand it. I thought it was super boring. I wanted to, because at least in the classes that I was taking, they wouldn't apply theory to current events. And I was like, how does this apply to what we're experiencing right now? And this was while we were in the Bush administration. That was when I was going to school for poli-sci. But now I eat it up. Like I think it's actually super interesting. And these frameworks help me to understand and kind of like dismantle certain things with a better understanding.
Or process events. Right?
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, I love the theory. Don't get me wrong. I love the theory. But we're trying to put asses in the seats over here. We need to put fans in the stands. We need to entertain the people. If we start fucking going in on some boring ass, dense bullshit, they're gonna run away in droves. Yeah, and I know Cale can hear me right now, and he's too much of a coward to come on and face the music. But the Saturday morning theory.
I'm on vacation. This is not okay. I do this on my vacation for you guys, for the fans.
Yeah, you probably.
The
what are you reading? Some like Engel's, treatise on the English working class for the 12th time. Is that like your vacation?
No, I'm reading the debates on historical materialism, started by G.A. Cohn in 1978.
I know, but Cale is my favorite person. Like, I love it. Who is Nando? Where do these young, like early 20s men come from? Like David Griscom, Cale. Like, where do they come from?
Honestly, from the material realities of which their generation has been raised. You and I, Anna, are of a different generation. We are geriatric millennials, okay? But there was that tweet that went viral. Maybe Cale can find it and edit it in. But there's a tweet that went viral, I think, by that guy Dan Price, who's like the good Silicon Valley guy who like takes like a $70,000 a year salary so he can pay his employees more. Anyway, that guy had a tweet that went viral that was essentially a breakdown of like wealth in America by generation, and like the boomers versus millennials and Gen Zers and whatever, and it just shows you like how much wealth was accumulated by the boomer generation, which is why they are all so conservative, contra to popular belief. There you go. That was quick, Cale. Well done. So millennials hold 4.8% of all wealth. And there are now 40-year-old millennials. I am not one of them just yet. At the same age, Gen X had 9% of wealth, and the boomers had 21% of wealth. So that's why boomers are also conservative, which again is the misconception is that the hippie generation were all these kind of like rabid left-wingers. It's true, there were hippies and they were left-wing, but they were a very small percentage of the overall generational cohort. All those people were fucking buzz cut. Right wingers, and whereas millennials are like Che Guevara. You know what I mean? That explains it right there. So the Zoomers, like Cale and David Griscom.
I'm not a Zoomer.
You're a Zoomer.
David's not a Zoomer.
You're
either.
a Zoomer. You're a Zoomer.
I'm the cusp. I'm like my year is literally the difference between millennial and Zoomer. So
you're a Zoomer.
No.
Yeah, I would just own it, Cale. You're a Zoomer for sure.
You're a
Zoomer. 24.
You're a child.
You're super
You don't
young.
remember 9/11. That means you're a Zoomer.
I do remember 9/11.
No, you don't. I don't believe you.
Like I remember waking up that morning. I was not.
You wake up every morning.
Yeah, but like I was not going. I had like I had afternoon. What is it? Preschool or something. So of
course. He doesn't remember
how old
shit
were you? I'm not going to do the math.
Yeah, like 5. No, so wait, maybe it was not.
You don't remember it.
Kindergarten.
There's no way.
You were born in 96. Remember.
Oh my God.
I mean, I think it has nothing.
He doesn't remember 9/11, Anna. He doesn't remember 9/11. He's not in our same generation. Come on, like if you don't remember 9/11, that's like to me that's the thing. Do you remember 9/11? I mean, let alone I still. I mean, I've brought it up a million times. Billie Eilish was born after 9/11. That just blows my mind that there are celebrities now in the current moment who were born after 9/11. That to me is the generational divide. Do you remember 9/11 or not? And if you don't remember 9/11, you're not in my generation.
That's incredible memory if that's true, Cale.
It's
okay,
a lie.
so give me specifics. Give me specifics about what
it's
you
stuff that his
experienced
parents
that
told
morning.
him.
No,
it's just stuff that his parents told him happened on that day, and he thinks he remembers it. That's how memory works.
No, I remember coming down and seeing my mom sitting in front of the TV crying. So, yeah, I remember it.
I believe you then. I do, because stuff like that does, like, yeah, you see your mom crying. That's gonna stay in your memory. Like, I believe that, even if you're 5.
And you're like, Mom, who's Posama Trinbladen? You know.
But that was the moment that Cale decided that
man.
he was going to open up all of the like super dense theory books and, you know, really immerse himself in understanding what's happening, not just in this country, but in the world.
I mean, I think to explain like Griscom and I and others, I mean, I don't think it's anything particularly unique. I mean, part of it's that we do this for a job, but I think a lot of it just was that we were at kind of the right age for Bernie 2016, that like the last 5 years have been like a supercharging moment for people who are, you know, interested in politics, that, you know, have some interest in affecting society around them. And so we took this like it was a perfect storm intellectually and politically, that there was this massive project to get behind and to then try to figure out these problems for the first time. And that the left had tried to figure this out for like the first time the left had tried to figure this out in like the last 50 or 60 years. So this was, and then things like Jacobin were highly useful, that there was people who were thinking about these things before Bernie, that kind of gave us a springboard to start figuring this out ourselves. But I don't know.
No, but I love it. By the way, we're giving you crap, obviously, but we're joking around. I think it's incredible. And when I think about where young men's minds were at when I was in my early 20s. Look, to be honest with you, I've always had an interest in politics. I remember before we did this preemptive war in Iraq, the hippie school that I went to had something called Peace Day every year. And for Peace Day, I gave an anti-war speech, but I was nowhere near as intellectual, I'll put it that way, as you and David Griscom are, right? Like, it took a while for me to kind of be able to talk about things and understand things the way that you guys do. And so while we're teasing you guys, mostly you, Cale, fact of the matter is it's super impressive and I love it. I mean, it's the only thing that really, it gives me a lot of hope, because it means that young people are woke in the right ways. You know, they're actually paying attention to what's going on. And
don't
more
insult
importantly,
right to his face.
No, I know. But you know what I mean by woke, and not like the toxic kind. I'm talking about like you're aware of not just what's happening now. You look at history in order to like understand it and process it. And I think that kind of differentiates your generation from what I experienced in my generation. Because in my generation, there was a lot of, we know better. Like, we know that what's happening is wrong. These are our opinions, but there wasn't really much processing it through historical events or through theory. You know,
we are children of something called the end of history,
right?
Which was a very real thing. And we grew up in the wake of that kind of intellectual revolution, which was the end of history. Cale and David Griscom came of age in a different era in which history came roaring back, baby. History, it just came roaring back. It made a big comeback. But I just love the idea of like these days, if you're some like young hottie or something and you like go home with the dude like off of like some, you know, dating app that I'm too old to know about, that I don't have access to because it's only for the youngs, and if you like get home and like if that man doesn't have like a Jacobin on his if that man doesn't have a Jacobin issue on his coffee table, he is not getting lucky. You know, like it used to be like if you had like the cool sneaks or like if you had a cool car or something. Now it's like, hey man, does this guy have like, you know, Capital Volume 1 in his bookshelf? Like, man, I'm fucking, you know, he's getting lucky tonight.
Yeah, we grew up in the age of Pimp My Ride, and what was the one about nice
MTV
houses?
MTV Cribs.
Yes.
And Lifestyles of the Rich and the Famous. All pre 2008 shit, which would never be, you know, acceptable today. It was like the 2008 crisis is what really changed all that shit. But yeah.
I think with the 60s generation, like, because the last time there was a left was basically the 1960s. And so those people, I mean, especially the first wave of those people, were also immediately immersed in historical and theoretical questions.
Yes.
Part of it is, I mean, it's twofold. Part of it is, I think there was some stuff that was produced that wasn't great. I think they ended up their challenge historically was that they were the first left to try to figure out what to do as the left was breaking off from organized labor. And so they tried to understand this moment through, well, maybe the problem is that it's actually not about the working class then. Maybe it's not about class. Maybe we can deal with, we can, advance our political project and principles through the students, through, kind of the splintering of the labor movement, the civil rights movement into, let's go into some form of nationalism or Black power, or into the feminist movement, into the environmental movement. And they all just kind of got fractured into their own separate lanes.
They got bought off. They got bought off by capital. I mean, it's that stat again, the 21%. They all got bought off. So that was the whole thing, is like, why like keep fighting if you could just, it's so easy to sell out. Now you can't even sell out. You can't sell out even if you wanted to. There is no option. Like a lot of that shit is driven by that. Like, it was just like they were just dangling the money right in front of them. Like, it's like, shut the fuck up, and you'll get a nice house and like a good, comfortable life, and you'll be able to give a good life for your kids. And like, now that's not an option. It's just not, even for like.
I think that's part of it. I think that's especially true for a lot of the people that ended up in academia. It's a lot of the movement leaders that had all this experience and knowledge and
or in politics.
Right.
Think about,
right,
what's his face? He's the congressman still today. He was a fucking Black Panther. And, and he's like some squishy Democrat, what's his name? Bobby Rush, or no, like, what's the guy?
Yeah, not Rush.
He's a fucking congressman today still. And he was a Black Panther, like, hobnobbing with Fred Hampton. And, like, it's just like, how sell out, bro. And you're going to leave a good life.
But there's
Bobby
two
Rush.
other things. Yeah.
Bobby Rush.
There's two other factors, though, because there's the thing that Barbara and John Ehrenreich identified in their piece on the professional managerial class way back when, which was that there actually is quite a bit of tension when you have an academic professor coming to the political meeting alongside some warehouse worker, that these people really do have very different lives. And that's not to say that these differences can't everywhere and always be overcome in some way. That I think there are situations where it's true that you can have solidarity between blue collar and white collar workers. Of course, we have to kind of hope that that's true, and I think it does. I think that is true empirically. But there is like that. There has been a ton of tensions around that, and that's been it's only gotten worse. Of the PMC, the professionals, having a very different life. I mean, they've essentially been the winners of neoliberalism, whereas the vast majority of other working people have gotten screwed over time and time again. And then the other thing is,
they have real quick. I just want to interject on that point, because I think it was a good one. But it's interesting because while they've been the winners of neoliberalism, they're slowly but surely becoming the losers of neoliberalism as more and more wealth, floats to the very top. And so I'm curious if, that trend is going to lead to more solidarity toward blue collar and white collar workers, because now their jobs are under threat. I mean, and that includes all white collar jobs. Nando, you mention it all the time. And every time you do, I kind of feel a little bit of panic because we fall under this category. But even people in journalism, right, in media, those jobs are, I mean, it's incredibly difficult already to find a well-paying job as a trained journalist. But as media conglomerates keep like sucking up all these little companies, outlets under their umbrella, as they consolidate, it's becoming even more difficult. And I don't know if you guys have noticed, even on places like YouTube, I've noticed that like I'll come across a story that seems fascinating. I want to like watch the video. You click on it and it's like literally a robot like regurgitating like an article or something. Yeah.
Oh, it's coming, baby.
It is. Yep.
Jacobin weekends will be hosted by an algorithm Very, very soon. They'll be able to do the same takes. They'll be like, well, actually, yeah, and it'll be
welcome to Jacobin weekends.
Yeah.
I mean, if this pre-tape doesn't work out, that's kind of what we've been thinking. So just so you guys know. But that, I mean, but like to Anna's point, I mean, then things like the DSA or other groups, I mean, this is the bottom falling out for a lot of professional class people. This is, this is why you've had these highly educated, more urban, people that are sometimes in creative class jobs or professional settings that have been moving to the left pretty hard and fast over the last few years, because they also have been like taken underwater by neoliberalism.
It's also why they're doing cancel culture like crazy. They're all doing the cancel culture because of the same thing. It's a temper tantrum essentially, because the capitalism ain't working for them no more.
That's true. And it's also, not to be cynical, but I've witnessed it and also experienced it firsthand. Cancel culture can also be used as a tool to cut down your competition and find a place in a company that's, still paying a decent amount.
Yeah. It's a lot of it. Yeah, exactly. A lot of it's fiercer and fiercer competition. And so people find means to get ahead. And that's just the name of the game, unfortunately. It's these horrible situations. I think just to finish my 3, I guess, from before is, I mean, the other thing that, like, the part of the reason why the new left falls apart, of course, is that there's a massive crisis at the end of the 60s into the 70s, the crisis of profitability that eventually leads to the ruling class restructuring the economy towards neoliberalism. And so, effectively all of the new left lost, but good ideas, bad ideas. And so now we, like in the wake of Bernie, were the first to inherit all of this and have to try to figure out basically not just like the last 30, 40 years of information and research and political thinking that's occurred, but the entire 150 years that we've had to, like, we didn't inherit, there was no generation before us to help teach us, so we had to learn it all by ourselves. So I don't know, I think that's my short answer. But I can dip out. Let's bring in Big Waz.
Ooh.
And nice.
Yeah, and then and then we'll bring in Alex Presson a little bit later. But
cool.
Joining us now is a great friend of the show, great friend of ours, Wosny Lambre, host of Woke Bros with Nando, a podcast that I never miss. In fact, you guys, I love your podcast so much that I wanted part of the conversation, and I never want to be part of conversations outside of the work I'm already doing. I mean, I don't mind being called a bro if you guys want to invite me. I'm just saying.
You'll be on soon. We booking you within the next 3 weeks. That's a guarantee. Okay. And we putting it on Jacobin so that the people know this thing is going to happen.
I love it. I love it. All right. So, you guys talked about the ongoing violence in Gaza, not just last week, or I should say this week, but the week before. And I just wanted to make a quick comment because, Waz, you had mentioned, and I don't think you're wrong for noticing this. I think that this is something that many people notice. Like when you're critiquing the Israeli government, it feels like, and it's definitely true in my opinion, that you can't critique it the way that you would critique any other right-wing government, right? Like because of how people identify with the state of Israel and how, honestly, I think a big part of it is just this very successful propaganda campaign that would immediately label anyone anti-Semitic if they had legitimate criticism of the Israeli government. But the Israeli government is not necessarily representative of Israelis. It's certainly not representative of all Jews around the world. It has nothing to do with your feelings toward Jewish people or the very existence of Israel itself. It's just valid criticism and critique. And I'm done with it. Like, I'm done personally with feeling like I need to walk on eggshells when critiquing that government, because I want to critique it the same way I would critique my own government. With fearlessness, with receipts, with actual evidence to the points that I'm trying to make. So I just wanted to quickly comment on that because I thought that was an interesting point that you brought up.
Let's do a thought exercise. let's just say somebody critiques, say, I don't know, the CIA and the torture program and waterboarding and black sites. And now let's pretend somebody says, say me, I say, whoa, you can't do that. That's an indictment on black Americans. What? Nobody would say this. Anybody who made that argument would be fucking laughed out of the room. When a freaking right-wing regime or right-wing government goes out and commits atrocities, upon people in a foreign land or wherever they do it, that's just what it is. It's an atrocity. That's not to say that the Jews haven't been historically oppressed people in Europe for centuries. That's not to say that. But when the Israeli government commits an atrocity against Palestinian people in Gaza, that's what it is. It's not anti-Semitic. It's not any of that. In fact, it's the opposite. When you equate the government with the people, the citizens of Israel, then you're being actually anti-Semitic to sort of posit the stance that everything is all one. It's not true. Like, you would never say that the craziness that we did in Vietnam, the bombs that we dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that's an indictment on Jewish Americans. It doesn't make any sense. When the American government or military carries out horrible acts, nobody says that's an indictment of the American people. So why are we doing this in the reverse with Israel? It's just a weird thing to see people try to do.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about, Mark Lamont Hill was fired from CNN for saying that we can now offer, for saying something like, we offer solidarity, for Palestinians and hope for a free Palestine from the river to the sea, which is something that Amir Haas said on our show last week. And I wonder if,
and I won't be saying on this show this week, I'll just say that.
Well, Mark Lamont Hill was fired from CNN in 2018 for those comments. I thought it was remarkable at the time. Obviously, like, it was a very indicative episode of a lot of things, small thing, but like a lot of the sort of right-wing free speech crusaders were nowhere to be found to defend Mark Lamont Hill's right to free speech. Certainly not the woke brigade was not like, CNN's firing a black man for these things. Like, a lot of this, it was very indicative of a lot of things. But I wonder if, had he said those comments yesterday or the day before in the wake of the latest violence in Gaza, that he would be fired. And I don't know that the answer is yes. I don't know that he would have. And I think that that's maybe a small example of just how a little bit of the discourse has changed, even in a short period of time, because that was not that long ago. I think that was in 2018. So there is some changes on this topic for sure.
There are certain stories that have come out during this more recent flare-up in violence that, like, I've followed the story closely. Like, there are certain elements that have now come out that previously would not have been reported, that weren't really posted on social media. I'll give you a specific example. There was a tweet that went viral about how Palestinian families in the Gaza Strip will immediately huddle into the living room together. So if there's an Israeli airstrike that hits their building, they all die together. And the New York Times has a podcast called The Daily, and I was listening to that just yesterday.
Remarkable.
Dude, it was such a good podcast. I was crying while listening to it. I was on my walk or whatever, and when she started talking about her family and what they do, and also when she specifically was talking about her younger siblings who don't really understand what's going on. I mean, it's, how do you listen to that and not criticize the Israeli airstrikes in the Gaza Strip? How do you not criticize that? I think that it's morally reprehensible to not criticize it.
Right. But in the past, just in America, I mean, it's common to hear Palestinian voices in media outside of the United States. It wasn't very common. Like, it is inconceivable for, like, if there were the equivalent of the Daily podcast by the New York Times during the Second Intifada, say in the early 2000s, they're not interviewing, they're not giving like tons of airtime to some little girl in Gaza. Like, no way. It was just inconceivable. So I too noticed that. I did listen to that episode, and it was brutal. But it was also kind of, I think, a sign of how things are changing.
Yeah. It's funny. Yesterday on my TYT Twitch show, shouts to Wozni and the Woznians out there if you're listening. I read an interview that Barry Weiss did with this Torres guy from
Torres
from the Bronx, who she took great pains before the interview to say he's from the projects, grew up poor.
Yes.
He's Afro Latinx.
Yeah.
And he's gay.
Afro Latinx. Yeah.
And he's gay. So clearly everything that comes after this is unassailable, libs. Obviously, because a gay guy who's a black Dominican and grew up in the projects could never say something that was stupid about Israel. Right. And he goes up there and says, oh, there's a bunch of propaganda being spewed, blah, 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 about Israel. I'm like, bro, we've been propagandizing the opposite for decades, forever. There's like, people are now pointing out that Israel does horrible things to the Palestinians in Gaza for the first time ever in mass media, but it's not propaganda. It's like, it's a correction of the record. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, Richie Torres was already saying that kind of stuff in his campaign, and it's like, what is
he's insane.
Where is this coming from?
Well, I mean, another example, by the way, is Ned Price, who's a spokesperson for the State Department, right? He's gay. I remember when Biden had appointed him, it was like a big story, like, ooh, first ever gay guy who's going to serve in this particular role. I don't care. I just personally don't care. What I do care about, though, is how he handles questions from reporters about the murders of Palestinian children. Yeah. He didn't have the ability to condemn it. He couldn't even condemn it.
No,
it's not a difficult thing to do. Okay. Even if you are, complimentary toward the Israeli government, even as they're doing all of this, it should not be difficult to condemn the deaths of civilian children or children, period. It's just like, I'm done with the, no, this is a good guy or this is a good person because they happen to be part of a disenfranchised group. But you can be part of a disenfranchised group and also be an awful person. Like, that exists. Oh, yeah. And so like, don't try to sell the American people on, hey, this person might do horrendous things, but they happen to be gay. I don't care. Don't care.
Well, one of the things that Noah Colwyn talked in Waz and I's talk with him on the Woke Voters podcast is that, for the first time, also one of the things that we're seeing is coverage of Palestinian resistance to the Israeli violence. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit this week. I mean, we talk a lot about labor issues on this very show and how the most powerful tool that regular people have is organized labor and the strike and things like that. I found it very interesting that this week the Palestinians called for a general strike. On Tuesday, the Higher Arab Monitoring Committee called a general strike, and it was remarkable how many people joined it. This article in Haaretz talks about various different sectors that joined the strike, but they focus first on these cleaners in an Israeli city that are mostly Palestinian, right? Palestinians. There's 20% of the citizens of Israel are Arabs, and they provide a lot of the labor, essentially, like and so they underwent this general strike, and the residents of the city to the cleaners strike response was, quote, "This is the perfect time to fix this distortion and start to employ only Jews or Arabs who are loyal to the state of Israel and declare so openly," one resident wrote to City Hall. Another added, "Fire them. It's identifying with terror." And another raged, "Now employ only Jews and they can go to hell." Only one resident countered these comments, writing, "People are losing their homes and their lives these days, but Modi'in's, this is the city, garbage hasn't been collected. Too bad that the garbage that comes out of people's mouths is harder to collect." But to sort of illustrate the just the power of the strike, which again, think of like Palestinians, some of the most disenfranchised, powerless people in the world. When they organize collectively, even within their limited kind of power station, they can exercise a great amount of power. They wrote, the article continued, Avi Mizrahi, who's the chairman of the Union of Cleaning Companies, who's also the employer of these workers, said some had wanted to come to work, but when they got to checkpoints, they were subjected to pressure not to break the strike. Quote, we felt their absence all over the country. We can't work without them. They're part of us. This is their employer. And then furthermore, in Bet Shemesh, which is experiencing a construction boom, all the cranes were silent on Tuesday. One crane operator said that many operators are Arabs who were striking, and added, if we would all fight the way for workers' rights, maybe we would achieve something. The Israeli Builders Association said Palestinian workers had observed the strike, with only 150 of the 65,000 Palestinian construction workers coming to work in Israel. This paralyzed building sites, causing losses estimated at 130 million shekels, or nearly $40 million. And I thought that was just a remarkable thing. It just shows putting your tools down and withholding your labor, like, is ultimately, even in this kind of neoliberalized world, even amongst people who are incredibly oppressed, like Palestinians are, that the power of the strike is just immense.
Yeah. I mean, it's the only thing that the power responds to, right? Power only responds to power. Like, if you're costing these guys millions upon millions upon millions of dollars, they're going to be forced to act. Because believe it or not, even rich people don't like to lose money, Nando. So they're gonna respond to that, and it's crazy because that's kind of all they have. You have to band together collectively. Individually, what can you really accomplish against something as powerful as the Israeli state or the American government by proxy? Like, that's gonna be tough to go up against individually. But if you can get if workers are banding together and sending a message loud and clear, then that's a beautiful thing, in my opinion.
All right, why don't we move on to our next story, because we do talk quite a bit about the PRO Act here over at Jacobin, over at Weekends. And we at first had about 5 Senate Democrats who were holding out on the legislation. Now there are 3. I want to talk about one of them, and that's Senator Mark Kelly. So at this point, there are 3 Senate Democrats who have not signed on to the PRO Act. Now, as we know, the PRO Act is an important piece of legislation that would expand labor protections. It's something that we've talked about in great detail on this show. Nando did a great Decode segment on it, so make sure you check that out. One of the Democratic senators who's against it or hasn't signed on to it yet is Senator Mark Kelly. And Ryan Grimm over at The Intercept did a fantastic report talking about some of the conflicts of interest at play here, some of the potential conflicts that could corrupt Senator Kelly's decision in whether he supports this legislation or not. So Ryan Grimm writes that Senator Mark Kelly enjoyed a 5-year paid seat on the board of the restaurant franchise company Landry's, which owns eateries like Morton's, the Steakhouse, and Bubba Gump Shrimp Company. Also, Kelly served on Landry's board from February of 2013 to August of 2017 and disclosed compensation of more than $5,000. There are no public records indicating exactly how much he was paid, but Securities and Exchange Commission filings show that in 2009, the last year Landry's filed SEC disclosures, board members had been paid about $120,000 annually in stock and cash, which would put Kelly's total compensation north of $500,000, $500,000 for the part-time work. And so there's more detail into this and just how, how involved he was with the restaurant industry and how much of a role that could be playing in his decision here. But I wanted to bring you guys in and get your thoughts.
Well, how do you apply for a job like that to get paid $500,000 for part-time work? That's pretty nice work if you could find it.
That's right. I mean, that's like, again, I mean, it's the league. We talk a lot about campaign donations, and obviously that's a factor in politicians deciding what to legislate on. But the other thing is just straight up like, who's paying me? Like, who's paying me directly, not donating to my campaign. Like, who's putting money in my pocket? Like, we don't call that bribery, but it's what it is. It's legalized bribery, straight up.
It is. And look, this is stuff that he was involved in prior to getting elected in the Senate. But I think that voters need to be a little more aware of previous jobs. Like with Trump, for instance, one of the talking points that you would hear from Trump supporters was, well, he's a successful businessman. And I think Americans are conditioned to believe that, first of all, he wasn't a successful businessman. So let's get that out of the way. But for those who believe that he was, right, we got to get past thinking that successful businessmen would make great leaders for a country. They're actually the opposite of that. I mean, all Trump did was use the office of the presidency to enrich himself, find ways to transition money from the federal government over to his personal properties. And in the case of Mark Kelly, you have someone who has a history working for the restaurant industry and making quite a bit of money in the restaurant industry. And they're not just looking out for their buddies, they're also looking out for their future, right? Like Mark Kelly is thinking about what he's going to do once he's done serving in Congress, if you can call it that. And so it's that revolving door. And it's also the fact that these lawmakers are able to invest in individual stocks while they're in Congress. It's insane. It's absolutely insane.
Any successful businessman to be in politics. No. I only want
Agreed.
unemployed losers who, are estranged from their son and are trying to shuck a Eugene Debs documentary that no one wants to watch. Yes, I'm talking about Bernie Sanders, incredibly just a deadbeat guy in his 30s who had achieved nothing in his life, then all of a sudden becomes the mayor of Burlington and is the greatest politician that we've had in our lifetime. So yeah, the model is be an unemployed loser. That's the guy I'm supporting, not any successful businessman. That's the last person I would ever want to support.
And to that point, I wish voters could understand that, like, a board member on some restaurant conglomerate has nothing in common with the people who actually work at the restaurant, right? Meaning the vast majority of his constituency are people like those restaurant workers. And he is against them. Period. He doesn't give a damn about what these people need and what they want because he's a freaking board member. And you're going to elect this guy to be senator from your state? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. He's of the class of people who are oppressing us. It's ridiculous.
Well, let me give you more. There's so many good tidbits in this piece, so I highly recommend you guys read it. But I'll give you a few more details right now. So, for instance, in 2015, in the midst of Kelly's board service, Landry's rolled out a forced arbitration agreement to its workforce, requiring them to sign away the ability to unite as a class in a lawsuit and agree to have any disputes handled by arbitration. And so obviously the PRO Act is not favorable to that method of employees holding their employers accountable. Also, another leading industry opponent is the National Restaurant Association, of which Landry's is a member. And when it comes to the pretty bitter defeat of the $15 an hour minimum wage, the Restaurant Association was really front and center in ensuring that it was defeated. So all of this plays a role in the quality of life and the quality of our workplaces. And we need to be aware of that. We need to be aware of the ties that these individuals have to businesses as opposed to the ties they have to their own constituents, right? Like, he's not going to look out for the best interests of his constituents when there's money involved, there's money on the line, and the people that he's closest to are the very individuals who are fighting against our best interests.
Amen. No, it was a great story by Ryan Grimm. It'll be interesting to see if again, I'm not saying that the PRO Act is going to happen. I'm not even saying that there's an above 50% chance it's going to happen. I'm not even saying that there's a 20% chance that it's going to happen, but it's probably closer than you would think, given the size of that legislation and the historic nature, I mean, it would be just a total game changer. It would be the most significant piece of legislation since the 1935 Wagner Act for the help of workers. So the fact that it's even like just a few people, like a few human beings away, from potentially passing is just, it's remarkable. Again, I'm not saying that those barriers are easy to overcome, but this is the kind of thing that, 10, 20 years ago, just, it wouldn't even be like in the discussion, something like this. I mean, we haven't really been in the discussion in a long, long time.
Not in Bill Clinton's Democratic Party.
No.
Yeah,
certainly
that's
not.
true.
Or in Barack Obama's.
Or you mean Tim Geithner?
Yeah.
All right. Well, why don't we take a break? And when we come back, Alex Press will be joining us to have a discussion about Amazon and some of the, interesting aspects of Amazon that she's learned through her excellent labor reporting over at Jacobin. We'll be right back. Joining us now for our interview is staff writer over at Jacobin, Alex Press. She covers labor issues. She's on the labor beat. Alex, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So let me start off by asking you about a statement you made during an interview. Why am I forgetting the name of the podcast?
A World to Win.
A World to Win. Thank you. Sorry. I'd subscribe to it. I don't know why I forgot it. But anyway, let me start off by asking you a question about a statement you made on A World to Win that I thought was really interesting. And I wanted you to elaborate on. You mentioned how some of these Amazon warehouses that have already begun to automate, they've already begun to implement robots, tend to have more worker injuries. And I want to know why. Why is that? Because the whole idea of having this automation is supposedly meant to make the jobs of these workers easier, but it turns out that they're actually getting injured more often.
Yeah, so there's a couple reasons. So the first is that in the warehouses where they have these robots more integrated into the operations on the floor, a lot of what they're doing is doing the sort of picking off of shelves and moving goods around. And so the workers then, instead of walking all around the warehouse, walking like 12 miles per shift, they're basically standing in one place and doing very repetitive motions. And so a lot of these are the injuries you get from just this repetitive motion for 10-hour shift. The other thing is that, these robots are pretty big. And so if you get into any kind of, altercation, if you actually, get there's just more danger there. It's a huge piece of machinery. And so there are accidents that happen. So that's part of it. But a lot of it really is this repetitive motion injury that's going on. And I mean, that's the thing is like robots don't necessarily mean better work or less work for people if they're being sort of thrown out on a floor for the sake of increasing profits and exploitation. The boss is going to find new ways to make the most of your labor. And so sometimes that'll mean even worse things for you. So, it's once again, the promise of technology depends on who owns that technology, right? And towards what ends it's going.
I think
since Amazon is saving money with robots, are any of those savings being filtered down to the people who remain?
It's a great question. No.
We're all laughing.
So it's going to Bezos, right? I don't know if you guys saw this, but reporting came out from this new book about Amazon that Bezos has not only a yacht, but a yacht for his yacht. That's so that he can land a helicopter near the yacht, not on the yacht, but on the support yacht. So that's where the money is going. And, to be clear, like, for example, Amazon obviously has gotten a lot of criticism for the working conditions, especially in the warehouses. And it finally has gotten to the point where they have rolled out a big PR sort of campaign about what they're doing in response. And, just this week, they published their press release about it. And they touted all these different programs, which are really horrifyingly dystopian and involve things like Amazon is the term that they're using, like these kiosks that take you through guided meditation. All of that is crazy and we can talk about it. But at the end of the day, the amount of money they're spending on what they're calling these safety projects is, I think, $300 million, which given the profits in the first quarter of this company were over $100 billion, is I think about like 0.2% of those profits are going towards increasing safety. And it's even a question of whether these programs increase the safety. So, no, none of that money is going to anybody's pockets, nor is it going to making their lives better.
Well, we'll talk about the go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to mention, you mentioned the super yacht, and I just wanted to give the audience some numbers on that yacht because it's an estimated $500 million yacht. And apparently, even though it's this giant 417-foot yacht, it's not large. It doesn't have the ability to have a helicopter land on it. So yes, the support yacht, as it's referred to, will be, going along for the ride just so helicopters can land on it. It's unbelievable.
I was just in Miami and I was out on a boat and I drove past, or whatever you call it, sailed past. It wasn't a sailboat, but we drove past Mark Cuban's yacht, which is about that size. Also has a support yacht. And the name of Mark Cuban's yacht, friend of the show, is the Fountainhead.
Wow.
Like the lamest fucking yacht name I could ever imagine.
Incredible.
Yeah.
That was great lengths you went to avoid admitting you were actually on Mark Cuban's yacht.
I was invited.
Traitor.
Yeah. He watches the show every week. I know. He's a fan.
Mark, reach out. I'll give you my Venmo. It's fine.
Yeah. I think it's worth taking a step back because you're on the labor beat, but obviously when you're on the labor beat in 2021, Amazon is kind of the company to look at because I don't think people realize just how much the pandemic has transformed Amazon as a company. I think it's like doubled in valuation since COVID hit. Can you talk about just like the sheer size of Amazon, like how much it's growing, how many people it's hiring, like all the craziness of the past year?
Yeah. So the way I describe it is I quote, a classic source for me, a Wall Street analyst who early in the pandemic said that coronavirus was like a growth hormone for Amazon. So it was already a massive company, right? It was one of the biggest companies on the planet, one of the biggest employers. And I was already, writing about Amazon all the time before the pandemic. But it's really hard to comprehend just how much it grew. So in sort of I think the first 10 months of the pandemic, just in the United States, Amazon hired about 500,000 people. The New York Times tried to find through history a precedent for this. And they said, maybe in the lead up to World War II, aircraft carriers were hiring that amount of the population to start building new planes and new things for the war. And so that's sort of the only precedent, right, in the private sector. It's still only the second largest employer. Walmart is still number one in the US, but it's on a trajectory to just surpass Walmart and surpass basically anything. And then, Amazon also is unique in that it controls so many different parts of our lives. Mm-hmm. So it's like everywhere you turn, it's there, which I think is really unique. And also is why people say it's, violating antitrust laws because it's controlling so many different sectors and parts of the retail market. But yeah, Amazon basically, if you imagine the pandemic shutting down all these brick and mortar stores, it's like it funneled everything to Amazon, right? Any dollars that would have gone elsewhere, both because other stores shut down, went to Amazon, and then also because people were stuck at home. And Amazon's model is so, the thing that they've done so well is get delivery to your door. It was like Bezos couldn't have engineered a better year for himself.
Yeah. I even read that. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, but this is good though, right? Like that Amazon is getting bigger and Bezos is becoming more powerful and ever looming over all of our lives. He's a benevolent billionaire is what I hear. This can't be anything but great things for the American people.
Yeah, totally. If there's anything we know, it's that the monsters that America creates when they get more power over the planet, there's only good things to come. The future's so bright that we all need shades at this point.
Yeah, Russian oligarchs are bad. American oligarchs are good.
That's
right. Great. Yeah. Exactly.
And Bezos is a cool guy, obviously. If you know anything about him, he's just he's a classic.
He's from Miami like me. He's from Miami like me. We hit the club every once in a while. We go on Mark Cuban's yacht. It's fine. You mentioned the brick and mortar because I think the the sort of common interpretation is that because online is more and more a bigger part of our lives, that the experience of shopping online is so much easier than going to the store, that Amazon is taking up a lot of their market share. But like what I've read recently is that they're now also trying to take over the actual brick and mortar store experience by buying up a bunch of actual stores. And they have shit like, shopping carts that check, like that you put shit into the shopping cart and it scans automatically, so you can just walk right out of the store with all the shit, like it's already kind of like like there's no need for anyone to work in the store. It's like this is a giant warehouse that just by walking in, you can just take a bunch of stuff, kind of like a Toys R Us shopping spree in 1995, and then just walk right out of the store. Like it really feels like their ambition is to take over every sector of the economy, no matter what it is.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, they purchased Whole Foods a few years ago, which is a huge acquisition. And it's because they'd been trying to get into the supermarket game for a while. In part, they'd been testing out these technologies you're talking about to sort of comical ends, in that, they would have their own employees test these out in prototype stores that were sort of close to the public. And like when they brought toddlers or babies in, it completely messed up the algorithm. It couldn't tell what was going on. But ultimately, they've now, basically perfected it, with the goal being not only that you don't have to spend any money on labor, which of course is great for any capitalist, right? They want less of that variable capital. And then on the flip side, if you don't have a credit card or an Amazon account, you're not welcome. And so it's perfect. It's a gated community, and they're hoping that, every store could be like that, where, it's always been true that stores want you to buy stuff, but now it's ensured that you can't possibly get anything without already having, say, an Amazon Prime account, right? And that's the big goal. That's the cycle that Amazon has, is get you to sign up in some way for whether it's Amazon Prime or otherwise, get your information in there. And they know that from there you're hooked, right? And so, now they have 200 million Prime subscribers, and it's only growing. But it's totally right. It's totally right that they're trying to take over both sort of physical stores, but also just new sectors of the economy, right? I mean, just this week, there was reporting about them making an offer of, I think, like $9 billion to purchase MGM. So then that could be on your Prime viewing, all of those titles.
The James Bond franchise, baby.
Exactly. And so Amazon just wants
Love Daniel Craig.
It wants to own the world.
So, okay, like obviously we know how negative this is for workers, especially when Amazon becomes one of the only places you could even find a job at this point, because they've, sucked up all of the retail jobs, brick and mortar jobs, or companies, I should say. But what about the consumer end of it, right? Because I think that while consumers are enjoying the convenience that Amazon is providing at this very moment, the thought of what Nando just described, going into this supermarket and just throwing things into a cart and walking out. I mean, it might sound convenient to people, but I know that like self-checkout is, in my opinion, a hellish experience to go through. Like I actually want human interaction when I'm buying something. Like I want to talk to someone. I want to ask them how their day's going. Like that interpersonal experience is good. If I need advice on a product that I'm buying, right? You can talk to the cashier, you can talk to a worker in the store. Like I don't think people are really taking in how much this is going to destroy even like the consumer experience that Americans think they love so much, right? Like, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, Amazon's an anti-social enterprise, like at every level, right? So obviously, I think that's true about the labor and the working conditions and the reliance on surveillance and exploitation. But it's also true on the consumer level, right? In that, not to idealize America at all, the last thing I want to do, but like, having stores and places to go is something that's valuable for people. And we are already seeing what happens when that's not the case. People are alienated, they're isolated, and of course, then there's no jobs at all. And that's exactly what Amazon wants, right? That is the future that they are taking you to. And while they sort of obsessively tout that they're good for consumers, this is their sort of motto, that it's the consumer is number one, the customer is all that matters. The reality is that Amazon, if you give something control over every possible market and you're relying on them, they can then set the terms, right? I mean, we see this with other platform companies like Uber. At first, the prices are very low so that you sign up and you get hooked. And all that money also, of course, is coming from VC backers, because the United States sort of creates these companies because there's so much money flowing from the top among these super rich people that they can just subsidize these companies until they've burrowed deep into the marrow of society, right? They're deep in your bones, you're reliant on them, and then they can jack up prices or they can do whatever they want. I mean, Amazon, this is part of the argument about antitrust with Amazon, is that it's not actually great for the consumer as far as the retail operation. They're actually using the data from third-party sellers on the website to create their own brands, and they're sort of pushing theirs, even if it's not the best sort of quality or it's not the lowest price, and consumers are getting screwed over, right? And so no matter which way you want to think about it, giving all of your power to this private company is just not going to end well, and it's already going poorly. And then that's, not even to mention the sort of reification of this model where a private company owns everything and there's no public say in the matter at all. I mean, a company like Amazon, when it gets this big, it controls the state at every level, right? And so it's very hard to dislodge it once it's there.
It's funny. I think people just don't realize that because a product like Uber is everywhere and everyone knows about it, they assume it must make bajillions of dollars. It's like, but Uber loses billions of dollars a year. And famously, Amazon frustrated a lot of its investors for forever by purposefully not turning a profit for like the longest time, like an absurdly long time. Amazon was an unprofitable company, and it's what you're talking about, that like they need to undercut to burrow themselves into society. And like thinking about like that, that Amazon is an anti-social company. This is like an anecdote, but a friend of mine is a headhunter, like corporate headhunter, does executive searches. And one of the projects that he worked on was to replace the head of Amazon Studios. And they were having a hard time finding that person for two reasons. One, which is a funny one, that Jeff Bezos does not allow any of his executives to fly in business class. And for a studio head, that is, that is enough. Of course, Jeff Bezos flies private.
Of course, he has his own jet.
He has a companion yacht, the guy. Yeah. Like, he has a companion yacht. Like, come on.
But so that was one thing. But the other thing is that when Amazon got into the entertainment business and created a Hollywood studio, Jeff Bezos assumed that you could suck the creativity out of the process of creating a show or a movie or whatever, there must be some formula, there must be some like algorithm, and so he created like a series of spreadsheets that like all these executives had to like, a show had to have this, that, and this and that and that, and like a very kind of structured thing. And if it didn't have all those things, it wouldn't be a hit. Of course, like you can't do that. Like,
it was, and you're not exaggerating. It was like 14 categories, and the executives had to explain in a written essay, basically a narrative sheet, why they were, if this series was lacking one of those things, they had to explain why. So it's just nightmare stuff. I mean, he's like a robot. He is capital embodied.
Yes, that's the right way. That's what I was trying. He is the human form of capital. Like, he's just that's the way he thinks. It's like take over, quantify, like suck the life out of everything. It really is kind of dystopian.
Right,
but I do want to pose the question to you guys. Like, I need a potato ricer. Should I not buy it from Amazon?
No, I don't think I think like pushing it on like people to do consumption habits is like not the right way to think about it. Almost anything, I just never think that's a solution to anyone's problems. I don't know.
It's not very effective. It does not have a good track record, especially if there's no boycotts or being coordinated by the workforce itself. Of course, in American history, there have been successful boycotts. This was sort of Cesar Chavez's famous thing with the farm workers, was boycotting grapes. That actually did put pressure, but especially with a company like Amazon, you're just never going to be able to boycott it out of existence. I mean, for example, right now we are using Amazon Web Services. They control the entire backbone of the internet. Literally the majority of the internet is Amazon infrastructure. So even if you don't buy your good, you're still using it every time you go on Zoom. You're using it every time you watch Netflix, so on and so forth. So there's just no way to boycott Amazon. And it also reinforces something that these platform companies really rely on, which is they want you to only sort of approach them as consumers, right? And I think they're very unique in history, or at least sort of innovating on this sense of brand loyalty, in that you're so deeply tied to these brands that they actually wield that connection that they have to their consumers against politicians in a way that's really powerful, right? In that Amazon doesn't even have to lobby. They live rent free in every elected official's head when they're thinking about, like, are we going to let Amazon come to town and build a data center or a warehouse? Are we going to regulate their, say, delivery driver model? Every politician thinks about the fact that their constituents are going to freak out if whatever they do, whatever regulation they impose, slows down the speed of delivery or prevents the promise of jobs from coming to town. So I really discourage people thinking that, like, oh, if I just skip ordering my Peloton via Amazon, then, like, I'm helping. That is not where we have to act. We actually have to act at the political level and collectively, if you ever want to build.
All right, hold on, Alex. Let me renew my Prime subscription.
Also, don't feel guilt. Like, just the guilt, I think, is just not a helpful thing. It's just not a helpful. The shaming, the guilt, like, oh,
not even white guilt. White
Well,
guilt's all right, isn't it? No.
Yeah, I only have Catholic guilt. Okay, so
before we get to Bessemer and just how honestly vile Amazon is in crushing any unionization effort, I did want to ask about something that you referenced earlier in the interview about this new Amazon project going on, because it's obviously, for people paying close attention, it's a PR stunt and it's a way to make it appear as though Amazon isn't as vicious to its workers as it really is. But I just think about the idea of forced meditation, like my boss forcing me to meditate. It makes me want to rip my hair out.
Just like the Buddha said.
Yeah, seriously. So first, explain what Amazon is and why you think Amazon is engaging in this new program.
Okay, I am going to do something unusual, which is I just pulled up the press release because I really don't think paraphrasing can convey how strange this is. So Amazon guides employees through mindfulness practices in individual interactive kiosks at buildings. During shifts, employees can visit Amazon stations and watch short videos featuring easy-to-follow well-being activities, including guided meditations, positive affirmations, calming scenes with sounds, and more. That is,
I just like the image of some working stiff who's breaking his fucking back, lugging boxes up and down a fulfillment center, just like stopping 1 second, just like plug into like a kiosk while everyone's while activities running behind him and he's going through some while they're not allowed to go to the bathroom, right? Like that's right. Not, you can't do that. You can do a positive affirmation, just think of all those boxes and how they're getting to people, like the feeling that they have when you deliver those boxes to their home and they get to their front step and there's 4 different Amazon boxes right there. That's a good feeling.
Yeah, because reaching some level of Zen couldn't happen from better pay, better working conditions. I think about around this time, tax time, I think about growing up as a little kid before I ever had my own job. The faces and the happiness I would see out of people when they got their tax return. Everybody was always so damn happy talking about what they was going to buy, the bill that they were going to pay, X, Y, and Z, because they got their tax return. It's just pay the people. You want them to be happy, pay them. It's just ridiculous that they would even, the lack of self-awareness that it takes after you do some union busting the way that they did, and then come out and say, no, but we got meditation for them. It's just insane. It's funny and it's insane, but it's also I think a really useful example of how this company operates. Again, this idea that Bezos as capital embodied, right? The model here is not about caring about people. That these are not seen as people, these workers, right? They are seen as machinery. And right. There's in Capital, of course, I should mention, since we're on the Jacobin show, in Marx's Capital, he talks about in the factories that the owners want to shape workers around the needs of the machinery and the profit motive. And it always evokes this image to me of a worker who has one arm super developed and the other is withered away, right? And he's falling over because that's his place on the assembly line. And that is how Amazon views its workers,
it views them as, how can I shape these human beings into the most productive, effective, and silent tools, right? So that they do not speak up and that no one hears what's going on. And so what they really want is, there's been reporting about managers saying that you just need to get into the flow. They tell workers, basically just vibe, just get to the point
just
where
good vibes, baby.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Just be one with the rhythms of the warehouse. And that's what they want. And so, nowhere in this document at all about their their response to complaints about working conditions is there any discussion about having lower productivity quotas. Is there any discussion about raises? Nothing like that. It's just about how are we going to reshape these workers? And so the sort of innovation here is admitting that these workers' minds are not right. They are stressed. And so what are we going to do? Well, we're going to innovate even more.
I just love that, it's true because the Silicon Valley tech capitalist thing, they're all these guys are like, new agey types who believe in all this shit. So it's just funny that that's like what their solution to these problems, like just, hey man, transcendental meditation, like David Lynch, like all these guys do that shit all the time. Right. So, that's funny that that's their go-to solution to the problem of like workers just like shitting themselves in the fulfillment centers.
Yeah, they forget that meditation doesn't work if your boss is forcing you to meditate.
Right, exactly. I remember going through some stuff in my personal life and like people telling me before I was ready to even consider meditation, like you should meditate. It would drive me crazy. But that was in my personal context. I can't imagine that in the context of something that I rely on for my livelihood. I mean, there's like a level of coercion involved in that shouldn't be discounted. But it's not just meditation. There's also literal physical activity that's being proposed here, right? So stretching to make sure that you don't hurt your body as you're doing really difficult manual labor in this warehouse for 10 to 12 hours a day. I don't want to do group exercise with my colleagues. Like, I'm just not interested in that. But I would like working conditions. I mean, if I were working at Amazon, obviously I'm very lucky and I have a white collar job. But if I were in Amazon, I would want to not have to worry about time off task so I can use the restroom. I would like to have a significant break so I don't have to, consistently do the same motions for hours at a time, and I can actually have a real physical break. Like, these are things that could be given or could be won by the employees through an effort to unionize, a successful effort to unionize. And that's part of the reason why workers in Bessemer, Alabama were trying to unionize. And so, you said something so interesting on the same podcast I referenced earlier, A World to Win, where you said that like these workers in Bessemer were forced to go to these meetings with Amazon, higher ups, executives, and they were just telling them over and over again, like, if you unionize, the union's going to get in between us, like it's going to destroy our relationship. But they've not only started to automate certain positions within these warehouses, they've also kind of automated the relationship between worker and manager through apps. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so I think I was referencing something that one of the sort of most visible union supporters in the Bessemer effort said in an interview. Her name's Jennifer Bates. And she was one of the first workers to reach out to RWDSU and get the union campaign rolling. And she was saying, what you're referring to is a captive audience meeting, which is where employer requires you to listen to your manager or scare you, right? And again, the insult here is that this is Amazon, where there's no time to even use the bathroom. And all of a sudden, the boss has found hours of your shift where you have plenty of free time to listen to your boss. So like, how insulting is that? Turns out they could have done this all along. But in these meetings, the manager was saying, a classic third party sort of argument that the union's going to get in between us. And Jennifer Bates says, I don't have a relationship with the company. I don't have a relationship with you, my manager. I have a relationship with the app. I have a relationship with the scanner that I use in the warehouse, and with the algorithms that tell me, when I've taken too much time in between scanning products or, moving something from one part of the facility to the other. So it sort of undercuts the arguments in that this is already an incredibly alienated job. So you don't have much to lose. Even the bullshit that bosses say doesn't really make any sense in this context because you're just living in a dystopian surveillance state. you don't have human relationships.
Yeah. I mean, it's so bleak. But, one thing that we try to do is not allow the failed unionization effort in Bessemer to get us down, because it's one battle, but the war continues. And so, that sparked efforts in other warehouses. At least it got, warehouse workers to start talking about the possibility of unionizing. Have you come across anything that gives you any hope that there'll be more efforts in the future that could possibly be more successful?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people, totally understandably can't help but speculate but they've never experienced what this actually looks like, right? So you're watching the media coverage and you're like placing bets, like, is this going to hurt workers, this loss? Is this going to set things back? The reality, when you're actually in touch with warehouse workers and sort of understand how these things work, is that people are organizing and they are metabolizing the lessons of losses and they're metabolizing the lessons of wins, and they're still organizing. And I think sort of at the micro scale, something that one of the workers said in Bessemer the day that the vote count was announced by the NLRB and it was a real loss. He said, I have work tomorrow. I am an outspoken union supporter. I have 1,000 coworkers who voted yes for this union. We still work there. We are still a union, right? And so I think just on a basic level, if you understand how like workplace power goes, like these are workers who under incredibly adverse conditions still voted yes and defied all of the threats and retaliation. So I think first and foremost, that gives me hope, because it's really shocking that many workers actually, withstood that kind of retaliation and actual what seems to be law breaking. I mean, it's quite likely that there will be a rerun of this election. It does seem like Amazon violated laws, which, to be clear, are completely written for bosses in the first place. Like, you don't have to break the law to union bust. And Amazon couldn't even help itself and still did seem to. At least that's where things are headed. NLRB hearings are still going on. But beyond that, I mean, what gives me hope is that this actually has somewhat energized an already existing movement to organize Amazon warehouses, not in the US, but around the world. More people than ever in these warehouses have been talking about organizing. I mean, I hear from warehouse workers all the time who are just asking for like nuts and bolts questions, or to be hooked up with a union organizer or whatever, or they read something and they want to know more details about a patent that Amazon has for surveillance technology. The movement is still existing. It's still ongoing. And there are networks that exist around the world. There are organized warehouses, particularly in Europe, and, European workers have already dealt with some of these tactics. For example, German workers were going on strike and Amazon responded by building out its warehouses in Poland to undercut their power and reroute their packages. And the German workers, instead of, being resentful and sort of chauvinistic and just being anti-Eastern European worker for undercutting their power, they started building networks with the Polish workers. And those networks still exist, and they have organizations in place now to coordinate their efforts. So we need more of that. And it's, I'm a very pessimistic person. I don't think you could be a socialist who writes about working class power in America without being somewhat pessimistic. But at the end of the day, the efforts are still ongoing. And we have to take this on, because Amazon is undercutting everything that exists as far as standards, whether it's in their industry, adjacent industries, at the level of democratic control over the state, what little there is, there is no way around Amazon. And so I'm heartened by the attention that this gets and the amount of energy people have. And, of course, by the fact that workers themselves are still willing to, risk serious loss of income, firing, incredible legal threats, because they want to do what's right.
Before we let you go, Alex, I wanted to ask about this bill in the New York State Senate that is calling for sectoral bargaining for gig workers. Now, that sounds kind of good, but is it?
Yeah. That was a great audition for some sort of 60 Minutes gig, but is it? It's funny that I tried to give my little qualified rousing optimism speech, because it
was great.
It's incredibly depressing, this subject in particular to me. Before we get into the details of the bill, to be clear, the wind is at the backs of the gig companies. They just had this huge win with Prop 22 in California. And so there was this sense of, We did it.
We did it, fam. Yeah, we did it, fam. Here in California, us three, we're in California.
The three of us, we all did it.
We all voted for it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there was some uncertainty because, like, Biden, as horrible as he is, does have some critics of the gig companies in his administration. And so there was some lack of clarity about which way things are going to go over the next 4 years. Like, are the gig companies going to be able to federalize this model that they built in California, which is, basically a third category is what they call it. So neither worker nor proper freelancer, but, this sort of quasi-independent contractor who's sort of subject to all of the whims and standards of the employer, but without having any labor rights or very minimal rights. And that's what the gig companies want, is they want to make that a national level law. And what they're doing in the wake of this victory in California is going to different states and trying to build pressure to pass those at the state level. And so New York is a key sort of goal of theirs. If they could conquer California and New York and then maybe Illinois, they've really done a lot. And so that's what this bill is. It is, it's still being written. No one has leaked what's in it yet. But the article you're referring to was from Bloomberg. Josh Edelson, who's a great labor reporter, detailed that there is a bill that seems to be near agreement. It might be introduced soon at the state level that gives sectoral bargaining, quote unquote, to gig workers like drivers for Uber and Lyft. And in exchange, it locks them out of employment status. So they're not employees under this bill, at least everything I've seen about it. So they would have the right with this bill to have unions and to bargain with these employers in some way, right, for certain standards. Now, the reason that it matters for us on the left and is more complicated than just like, fuck these companies, is that some unions are involved in crafting this language. And the reason that unions would be involved in this is it does add members to their roles. And that gives them not only financial power, but also more political power to say that they have X, Y, and Z number of members now. And so, I've written in the past about how labor has been pretty unified in opposition to this because it's seen as selling out these workers, right? So it gives some benefit to a union, but these workers are literally put as under legal law, under laws as second-class citizens, basically. They don't have rights that are legally theirs. And so unions have been pretty unified, saying we're not going to do that. Equal rights are equal rights. We learned from the problems of the New Deal that we should not exclude sectors of workers, especially not, these are majority people of color, majority women. And so you're actually legalizing inequality here under the law by denying them, say, minimum wage rights and access to overtime, things like that. And instead, these laws say, we'll strike a bargain. We won't give them those rights, and we'll sort of lock in this model that these gig companies have pioneered. But in exchange, maybe they'll get access to unemployment or they'll be able to have workers' comp. It's sort of like a bargaining chip. But the reality is that worker power requires workers, and there are no workers involved in these negotiations. And the most democratic labor organizations that work with and are composed of gig workers are really opposed to this bill. Because again, it locks in a model that is completely illegal. These companies, as we said, Uber doesn't turn a profit. Its entire business model is just breaking the law and labor arbitrage. And if we put in writing that this is okay and we pretend that gig companies are a legitimate sector, we sort of lock in an inability to overcome these business models, and it legitimates the model itself. It also, undercuts efforts at the federal level to pass things like the PRO Act. It says, unions don't need to change these models. We can bargain with, again, people who are responsible for incredible injustices against workers. So it's really dark that, for example, the Transport Workers Union president is approving of this bill. He's quoted in these pieces saying it's really good. That is a union with radical history. So this is really deeply upsetting and would be an incredible loss and just a sad statement about where we're at if a state like New York locked in exclusions to labor rights.
And you know why it's important? When I was in college back in New York, I worked at UPS part-time, but I was in the Teamsters union. When you get hired, they tell you, I think it was 30 days, basically. It was don't fuck up for 30 days until you make book. and then you're good, which essentially meant this: they can't just fire you. Which once you remove that from the equation, they now have to talk to you with some type of level of respect and dignity, right? And I was just a pissant part-time worker in the sort aisle. Like I was in the, basically the warehouse. A box comes off the truck, it goes on a belt into the sort aisle, and we put it on some other belt designated for things that are going to Texas, things that are going to down south, things that are going out west, right? Like we have to sort the freaking boxes, right? Like not an important job. But at the end of the day, when we're getting overwhelmed and, boxes are piling up and it's starting to get dangerous, there's a freaking button you press, boom. No supervisor could come and turn that button back on until we feel like we've moved everything safely and we do what we want to do. Like it gives you the right to work with some type of respect and some type of dignity. Again, because these people, as long as you show up to work and you show up on time, they cannot fire you. Right. And, another thing that would happen is I would say like once a month, my shop steward would come to the sort aisle and tell the supervisor to go fuck himself as a way of basically telling the guys like, yo, these people are not our rulers. They're not our masters. They just work here just like us. They don't get to treat us any type of way. Right. And to me, that means everything, on the sort I was probably making like $12 an hour, $11 an hour, but I was in the same union as the freaking drivers, basically the most important people in the company who make a good amount of money, et cetera, et cetera. But, that collective bargaining, that collectivism is what allowed for everybody at the job to have dignified work. That's what we're talking about here, right? Like the ability for the bosses to just come down on you and threaten your ability to pay your bills, to pay, for your kids' daycare, et cetera, your freaking healthcare. Not that Amazon would do that, but your freaking healthcare, like all of these things that are essential to our lives. They can't just come down and put us under duress by threatening and take those things away from you. That's what Alex is up here talking about today, man. Like literally a worker's right to be a freaking human being at his job, and it means everything.
Yeah, much like the greatest weapon that the union has is the strike. The greatest weapon that the boss has is the sack, is like being able to fire someone, like if you're just granting them that, making it easier for them to do that, then you've lost the game right there.
Yeah, and I would just add, not to belabor the point, but everybody who's in the union organizing world, it's understood that while I think a lot of pundits try to pretend that they don't need to talk about dignity or feelings, that it's all about like wages, the reality in shops is that half the time workers are most motivated by the feeling that they're being disrespected and that they want dignity. And so, bills like this that sell out workers, I mean, that is literally what is being done, is that like unions are shaking hands with people that destroy workers' lives. The amount that sort of doubles down this sense of feeling literally subhuman, like you are, we talked about the alienation of Amazon's algorithms. Imagine, being an Uber driver you're completely governed by an algorithm, and they can just shut you off and boot you, and all of a sudden you're starving and your family's on the streets. And so having a route foreclosed for you and your coworkers to organize because someone somewhere decided in a back room to strike a deal with the people who created that algorithm and who profit off of your misery, is just the outrage of that and the disrespect that will follow from being locked out of things like the right to a minimum wage. I really don't know how to communicate just how harmful that is, and how no labor organization, nothing worthy of the name of union, should have anything to do with something like that.
Amen.
Alex, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. Everyone go check out Alex's work over at Jacobin. She's a staff writer who covers the labor beat, and she does it well. Thank you again.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. This was fun.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Special thanks to Alex Press and, of course, Wosny Lambre for joining us today. Woz, you're the best. And for all of you who are watching, if you love the show, please like and share the video as soon as it's uploaded on the YouTube channel and ready to go. And make sure you guys are subscribed to Jacobin, not just the YouTube channel, but of course the wonderful magazine that made all of this possible. We love you guys. Have an excellent weekend, and we'll see you soon.